All right, I'm just testing the audio here. Looks like it works. Okay, so for today, I wanted to bring something a little bit different than what we've been talking about. And specifically, I wanted to talk just for a little bit about some of the most commonly used maps today. And those are maps of not real places. Yeah, so I'm going to show you we're going to talk a little bit about cartographic design in video game maps. And as we kind of move toward larger and larger open world style video games, there's quite a bit of kind of on screen digital cartography going on, oftentimes designed not by cartographers, but by visual designers, graphic artists, and even programmers in some cases. So I'm going to start off with two games that I'm actually playing right now. Yes, I have about 45 minutes of spare time a week, and I'll play a game. So the two games I'm working my way through are on the Nintendo Switch. I play Breath of the Wild, which is a Zelda game, and here's the map. And then I'm also playing on mobile Diablo Immortal. Although I'm not one of these people who's willing to mortgage my house to buy in-game power-ups, which seems to be the deal. But let's start off with Breath of the Wild, and I'll show you some older game mapping, kind of just talk about some of the visual elements that kind of work or maybe don't work. And then maybe on Monday for a few minutes, if you've got some ideas about this, I'd love to hear them. So anyway, in Breath of the Wild, the open world is pretty huge, and I'm not going to go into kind of the mechanics of the game or what you're looking for, but or what you're doing in the game. Some of you probably already know, and others don't care. But over here we have a legend, and the legend's pretty simple. It actually steals or borrows some symbology from the National Park Service map, which, if you remember from earlier this semester, is a series of kind of icons with like kind of a glyph in the middle in a square box. And then also some other kind of common video game tropes. So one of the most important aspects or geographic features in the map itself in this game are these towers. And so they're shown pretty obviously. Another thing about video game maps that kind of vary is that a lot of times, because these are based on how a programmer and a group of designers have kind of structured the open world, these are often square shaped. And actually, Breath of the Wild is no exception. So as we zoom all the way out on this map, and this is actually a reproduction by a third party website. So the in game map is slightly different, but in terms of its kind of stylization, but it's pretty close. And what you notice about this is the open world is square. And this is one feature that you often find in these maps, although not always. And I'll show you some counter examples here today as well. Another thing about this is that water features and boundaries are often in game. They look like natural features, but like, for example, the edge of this of the map here is pretty much a cliff. And so anybody who is playing the game and comes up to the edge, there's no way for you to get over to the other side here in any kind of reasonable way. And that's on purpose because it would destroy the in-game mechanics and the kind of open world feel if you come across a boundary. So oftentimes the physical environment is the boundary. Here, it's the ocean. Until you get certain powers in this game, you can't even reliably swim any great distance without your character dying, right? And then, some of the interesting aspects or decisions in the cartography here is like, for example, in Breath of the Wild, we have some pretty obvious features and some labels and stuff, but we actually have contours, which are pretty helpful if you're accustomed to reading a contour map, and indications where there's significant amounts of vegetation, forest features and things like that, or even forest features within water bodies. And these are obviously important in the game for various reasons, including, you can get food in these places for your character to replenish their health, right? There are also, various major enemies that you can attack that are shown via icons, and both cultural, or I don't know if you can call it cultural, because is there a culture in a video game? I guess so. Cultural features as well as natural ones spread throughout the kind of the map. So it's kind of interesting design choices. In this case, there's a lot of kind of earth tones Even the forests themselves are mapped using brown colors rather than green ones. And the features of things that you might need to get to are shown much kind of with a high level of contrast between the background map and the actual features. One thing I will mention is a lot of times video games have features that are meant to look natural, but are probably impossible in the real world. And there's not a problem with that, but it's something to point out. You know, Death Mountain in this video game is an unlikely geophysical landform. You know, same thing with this whole with the divine beast that's in this location near the Great Zora Bridge, right? A lot of these features are exaggerated, but you know, it's a video game. It's not meant to be reality. And in fact, this isn't meant to be our reality. It's a game that's set in some other legendary reality. So the design choices here are pretty interesting overall. It's interesting that the designers in this case made a landscape that's so muted when the in-game color choices and other design aspects are actually quite colorful. Switching to Diablo Immortal, which is a game that you can play on mobile or on a computer. I don't know if they have console versions of it, but maybe they do. This is very much a free-to-play game. So, and it's kind of harkens back to the late 90s when I was playing the original Diablo and also Diablo 2, which are both great games. But basically, the premise of this game is you go around through various dungeons. It's kind of almost a it's a role-playing game, right? You go through various dungeons, killing minor and major enemies, gathering riches and weapons, and playing through a storyline. The difference between Diablo Immortal and Legend of Zelda is the Breath of the Wild rather is Breath of the Wild is one great big open world, whereas Diablo Immortal approximates that with various zones in the world map. So this is one part of the world called Ashworld Cemetery. Here's another one called Bilefen, right? Here's the Dark Wood, which, as you can see, is quite full of enemies. This one's Frozen Tundra. I haven't made it there yet, etc. And so these individual maps, which I'll point out are not square, right, are connect to each other, but not in a way where you would walk, say, from this place, Wortham, to say its neighboring Shassar Sea, right? The Shassar Sea map, this is a duplicate of there. Let's see, a better example would be Ashworld Cemetery. You'll notice there's no way to walk from Wortham to that. Here's the Wortham map, right? And, you know, yes, there's two Ashworld Cemetery, but in the game, if you walk to Ashworld Cemetery, it's not continuously connected like it would be in an open world like Breath of the Wild, right? And so these individual separate maps are basically like worlds you warp to rather than actually connected seamlessly to one another. In terms of map design, again, notice that the background in this video game map is relatively muted using earth tones, and the location of various important features are shown here in very high contrast icons, right, throughout. There's also interesting labeling, and icons for various friendly features, like these ones right here, are much smaller on the map than various features that are either related to the story with these warp points or enemies, right? So it's interesting, different kind of take on it, although there's some similarities with some landforms being shown here, even vegetation and stuff, and then the fact that it uses a muted background. Now, another game that I'm pretty familiar with and actually kind of started this open world or relatively open world kind of map design and actually integrated it as an early aspect of things is actually a game called Doom, or not Doom, Descent. Doom is one too. Descent is a game that I got into when I was a teenager, and it's one that I think a lot of people in this day and age don't know very well. And here's kind of what the gameplay would look like. And so it's very much a 3D world. Okay, the graphics aren't great, but the gameplay was quite good. And for the time, the graphics were also pretty good. the thing that sets this game apart from others from a cartographic standpoint is that very early on with the release of Descent 2, which is kind of the sequel to the original game, um, the game actually came with a model designer and modding tool. And so now that I've shown you what the gameplay kind of looks like, and I'll put this link up in Blackboard so you could check it out if you want to. Um, you could actually design with this with the software a three-dimensional levels. And so I'm going to show you this. I'm not going to allow the voiceover of the person actually presenting this show, but I will again also put this up in on Canvas as a link. This is a true 3D modeling and CAD environment. So you could make a level of your own by actually drawing out these features, which the person who's driving here is going to show you how to do. And this is 3D mapping. In fact, the tools used here are very similar to what you would see in fine scale mapping software like AutoCAD. So CAD, CAM software, computer aided drafting and design. And so basically you build these three-dimensional corridors and tunnels to create a level along with doors and enemies and power-ups. And then you skin them using various textures, which are shown here in the left-hand side as palettes, right? And so these, I'll skip ahead a little bit and kind of see how some of these features get made. Each one of these is actually a three-dimensional polygon, so like a box, and you can actually mirror them and readjust individual edges in order to make a 3D environment, right? So this is showing this here in the video. So this game was very much built not only to give you a playable game, but if you wanted to, even using computers of the mid-1990s, create three-dimensional models that you could then share and play online with friends or random internet strangers, as the case may be. So this is actually some of my very first mapping experience was designing and modding levels. And, everybody likes to talk about how good they are at their favorite video game, but this was a game that I was pretty good at in early online internet play. Okay, make it sound like all I do is play video games, which is not true. It's I barely have any time to do it. Of course, a lot of our early video game experience for old millennials / young Gen Xers like me was through like Nintendo Entertainment System and Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis, etc. And so even these 8-bit games, these very early video games or fairly early video games, were based on maps. In fact, like Super Mario Brothers 3, you would walk around these two-dimensional maps, and each one of these nodes would be a level you could play. This happens to be World 3. 2, and then you'd have a 2D side scroller, which you can also map here. So this would be the whole level. You start out here, and you'd have to work your way through all these obstacles, collect coins, punish your enemies, get power-ups, and make it all the way to the end. If you fall in the water, by the way, in this level, you're dead. And the interesting part about this is that, this actually involved multiple maps. Now, the cartographic design here is very different than, say, Breath of the Wild or Diablo Immortal, in that it's very colorful. It's meant to be for younger people. It's definitely everyone can play game. There's no blood, there's no violence, there's no battling, except for jumping on top of random flying turtles and stuff, right? So it's definitely has a different demographic and design language. But, you can map both in profile, which is what we see up here, and then also in a nadir format from straight up and down, or we might call it orthographic format, right? If you ever want to check this out, there are plenty of different 2D maps of these levels. Some of them, they look really short, but they're pretty challenging, actually. And remember, too, these were, early 1990s cheap console games. So the design couldn't be super complicated because storage space is fairly small. But if you want to check out any of these maps, I'll post a link to this one too. Now, some other games that are very map based include the very good but pretty adult Red Dead Redemption 2. So this is an online, slightly modified from the game map, but let's just pick kind of some busy area here. So I'll zoom in. So this is a town. Now the premise of the game is that you're kind of a Western outlaw, and you kind of work your way through a story, um, get back at your enemies, that kind of thing. And the map actually has a wide variety of areas that kind of they kind of replicate Western towns, but also towns in the South. There's an area that's set up to look like Southern Louisiana. That's very interesting. There's parts of it that are a lot like, say, San Francisco. And so there's definitely real world inspiration that goes into these maps. But I wanted to point out that the design language here is very similar to Breath of the Wild, which is another open world game like this one. You've got contouring to show you the landforms. We've got built-in labels. And then we have these colorful icons that call attention to various resources, hazards, and important game milestones, right? And these kind of interactive online maps are meant to act as a companion to the game, but you can actually pull this map and the other examples up in the in-game in order to navigate or even warp to new locations, right? So I just wanted to mention this one because, one, it's a very popular, very high quality game, by the way. It's definitely a game for mature people, but the map here is a crucial element of gameplay. To contrast, oh, and by the way, with the Red Dead Redemption map, I did want to point out that while the open world is constrained by kind of the nature of digital games, where we have to have kind of a defined play space, it is not in fact its own. It's not in fact a square world, right? And so as we get toward maybe more complex games, and this is a huge game, or more modern games, you'll see that the world takes on less of that square shape. Of course, here's another exception. Forza Horizon 4 is part of the popular driving video game series. It's another good one that over the pandemic lockdown of 2 months, my son and I played a bunch. And the kind of neat thing about this game is that it's a truly open world. You can drive your vehicle anywhere here, and all these colorful icons, which sit on, by the way, a colorful base map, right, with kind of more muted labels. Each one of these colored icons is an event or a challenge that you can do, right? And the map itself is a square, though, although you really have trouble. You can't cross these bridges to get to the other side of this. You need a special vehicle to make it across. So again, the simulated physical terrain ends up being kind of your boundary, right? This is kind of a little bit different because the design language is more colorful and more realistic. So instead of being like a map, it looks more like an air photograph or a satellite image. All right, I've never played this game. It's The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt. But again, this one strives to be a little bit more realistic with its mapping strategies. And also, I believe this game actually keeps you in the game and not wandering outside the boundaries by basically leaving you no reason to go beyond the kind of gameplay area. I believe this has a bunch of different worlds that you end up working your way through. And if you notice, the base map features here are kind of a split between that gentle earth tones and more realistic display. Now, remember, I guess this game is set more in a historic or fantasy kind of realm. You may know better than I. I don't want to make any strong declarations because I've never played it, but I've heard it's a good game. And then, of course, some online games really lean into the. Oops, sorry, I don't want to hear this person talk about this game. They really lean into water as a boundary. So this is Grand Theft Auto 5, not endorsing the game at all. It's violent and kind of sick in many different ways. from what I've heard. I've never played this particular chapter in this game series, but it looks much more like an actual map that you might like, you know, see online, like Google Maps. It shows major features, they're labeled, and then the icon set on top of various places and challenges that you can actually go on quests and whatnot, or purchase weapons or whatever it is you need to do. These are shown in a more subdued, less colorful way, right? So the background map gives you only a broad idea of what the terrain might be like. So it contrasts quite a bit to some of the other maps. Some of the design features here are determined by the technology or the game itself. Others are definitely design decisions. And so kind of wanted to talk about, cartography choices for, fictitious places, right? And so some of these cartography choices are pretty subtle, like de-emphasizing boundary areas by, adding clouds, or just flat out not putting them on the map. There's not really anything to do except drive on these two tracks, I guess, in this part of the map for Grand Theft Auto. So, don't put any interesting details there because there's nothing interesting to do as a player, right? A lot of times the work here is the background map is the kind of more intensive cartography, but it's actually takes a back seat to the playable items that make up the map. Anyway, I'd be curious to spend a few minutes on Monday listening to what you think and hearing about how game maps factor into gameplay. Next week, I want to tackle a different type of mapping of non-reality places. So that'll be for next Friday. Anyway, I'll see you on Monday, and have a good weekend.